My name is Erin Payton, and I'm the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is located in Oak Park, Illinois. Our mission is strengthening our community through learning, giving, and sharing our landmark building. You are here because you won this wonderful experience during our Come Together 60s Gala in March as part of our auction. And we're so happy that you signed up and helped support our organization, and now you're here enjoying this wonderful program. But now I'm going to bring Carol Conboy on. Carol is our gala chair.
Today I'd like to introduce our wonderful program, and I'm excited about this because Edie Schaefer and I have been to Margot's studio, Margot McMahon, who was going to do the presentation today, many times or a couple of times, and so much enjoyed it. And I know you're all going to enjoy it today also. But Margot McMahon earned an MFA from Yale University, then taught sculpture and drawing at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, the Paul University and Yale University's Norfolk Summer School, as well as Oak Park District 97. Margot resides in Oak Park and has her studio there. Interpretations of human, plant, and animal forms define the sculptures and drawings of McMahon. She has been called the Studs Terkel of the sculptural world by Lincoln Park Art Initiative for her sculptural interpretations of everyday heroes. What Are You Doing for Justice? A sculptural portrait of Monsignor John Egan is installed within a meeting area outside the Student Center at the Paul's University campus in Lincoln Park. Monsignor Egan has done much to promote justice as a community organizer and as a priest. Many of the sculpted portals from this exhibition have been collected by the Smithsonian. Margot's sculptures are also on exhibit in Swasmares, Guernsey, UK. Hopefully I got that right. A lifelong environmentalist, McMahon views the human form as one with nature and creates symbols of this concept. Public sculpture, commissions, and museum and gallery exhibitions have been the core of Margot's work as an artist. She has established her drawings and sculptures in Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Santa Fe, Cincinnati, and Connecticut. Besides her many artistic creations, McMahon is also a writer. She is currently publishing the Mac and Irene trilogy about her greatest generation parents. These books will be coming out this summer, and Margot will be giving us a brief review of these books. I am proud and excited to welcome Margot McMahon to our program today. Please welcome our own Rosie the Riveter. Welcome, Margot.
Thank you so much, Carol. It's so nice to see you again and be here with everyone, and just to talk about sculpting and this wonderful adventure that I've been on throughout my life. People ask, what is the pathway to becoming a sculptor? And I don't know if I could actually tell what the pattern is, but one sculpture has led to the next and the next. And it's been quite a remarkable experience working with a wide variety of people all over the country and world. I have a piece in Japan and England, several pieces in France. And I just kept my focus about making the sculpture, and the rest followed. If we want to start with some of the slides, I can show you my foundational years of becoming a sculptor was partly teaching. As soon as I finished school, and while I was in graduate school, I was teaching at Yale University. And then I came, and my sculpting professor at the Art Institute of Chicago retired, and I took over his classes. And one of the benefits of teaching is you have to teach safety. So I am kind of a safety freak. It's all the senses that I try and protect while I'm working up on a scaffold and carving. And so I've got earmuffs on there. I've got a face shield. I have a mask for dust. I've got goggles, and those gloves that I'm wearing are vibration, so that after I finish a day's work, I can actually pick up a glass of water and have a drink. Also, safety boots, things you can spring and jump with, and yet will protect you if there's something. And I switch these out with respirator masks if there's fumes, or different levels of dust masks. So that's an introduction to how one gets to be a sculptor for a long life. Make sure you're safe all the way throughout the process. And you will see throughout this the variety of tools that I use, which my studio is an amazing storage space, because I like to address each location. I guess we could go to the next slide. Each location for what I imagine seeing in that space. This is my backyard. The garden is getting close to a full bloom, which makes all of the sculptures that are exhibited there and part of garden walks and studio walks and all the rest. It's a space that is creative in its own right. I've had annual visits with the kids' classes here in May, and Sugar Beet Co-op has come by, One Earth Film Festival, a lot of different environmental organizations for my greening of a small backyard. I'm an environmental artist, so that plays out in the kind of reproduction of a rainforest. We have a canopy on top with the maple tree, and on the left, a pussy willow tree. And then there's the vines, and around my studio window, you'll see I've grown some euonymus in the shape of a dragon, which took about 12 years to grow that vine into the shape. The squirrels had a great time with the throat, so that'll grow in this year, and then I'll prune it back. But the dragon head is across the top, and then the tail winds around and is vertical on the bottom. Thank you. Yeah. So that goes around the window, and to the left of our left is 3 panels that are 10 feet high that I've been carving since, about October of this year. And we'll do some close-ups on those, but it is also symbolic of my environmental statements, human, plant, and animal. And the left panel is the plant. And last fall, I gathered the leaves on our block. We have at least 13 different types of trees, which is the new way of planting in parkways, so that we don't reconnect with that canopy created by the Dutch elm that we loved along Green Bay Road, that beautiful cathedraling. But once the Dutch elm disease comes through, then all of those trees are wiped out. So now our arboretum in Oak Park plants a variety of trees, the huckberry or whatever the variety is. So I've gathered the leaves, cast them in bronze, and those are going to be inlaid on one of the panels. The center panel is about the struggles of humanity, people, and it kind of has a spiritual cloaking by a winged rising figure at the top. But life isn't always easy, and we rise up and somehow overcome. So it's a hopeful but realistic look at the struggles of the human, a human. And then on the right are spirit animals. And this is going to be at Hepzibah. So I imagined while carving them that the students would find a spirit animal that's in a totem form. There's about 8 different birds and lizards and fish, and everybody gets to pick their own and kind of carry that within them of a friend, like a stuffed animal, I guess, but identifying with an animal, which I think is age old, goes back to probably the cavemen, that we have symbols of herds of buffalo and things like that. So this is my studio. Welcome. We'll pass the scaffold and walk in the door and start the tour. So like I said, with teaching, tools and equipment are important, and that I work in a lot of different materials because the space itself tells me what it wants to be. I look in a plaza or a garden or a backyard or someone's home and invent what I think would fit that area. So sometimes it's modeling in clay, and we can go on to the next slide. Sometimes it's modeling in clay. On the left, you're seeing my Clutterbug studio, but there's a saw at the bottom, a ladder so that I can get to what's stored on top. And up there are all kinds of glues and sprays and waxes. And on the very top are maquettes, ideas that I've presented for sculptures, and many of them are made and some of them are still yet to be made. On the right side, that shorter shelf, is my gift of art workshops, which I've done for over 20 years, teaching all ages of students what I taught at Yale University and the School of the Art Institute. I've adapted it to preschool, 2nd grade, middle school, high school, and of course, college. But it is the so those are books called The Gift of Art, let's see, Gift of Art, Sculpture Adventures for Young Artists. I also have taught adults because I'd like those adults to then take the workshops and teach others how to do the sculpting process. In 2 hours, you can learn additive, subtractive, constructive, performance, and time arts, which are the 5 aspects of sculpting in our time, much different than Michelangelo's time or even Matisse's time. We now have video and performance as a part of sculpture. And then stored on those shelves are the boxes that I bring in for different workshops. So in the center, I'm coming up out of all of my gear and welcoming you to the studio. On the right side is, of course, the tools I wanted to put away before the studio visit, but that helps to have them on hand. The level on the left, there's always need a measuring tape to plan and cut straight and know whatever the material is. Most recently, I just did a workshop at Gwendolyn Brooks Park in Kenwood, in which we took care of 50 saplings in the park that needed mulching and water and some compost. And then we wrote poetry about it and presented it on the porch of Gwendolyn Brooks, which is part of the monument to her. So a lot of these tools were things I needed to take care of the mulching and bring to the park and tend to little touch-ups on the monument before we had our annual poetry on the porch of Gwendolyn Brooks performance. What this really helped, we collaborated, and by we, it's Yale Blue Green. We collaborated with the Color of Change, which has grown out of the Black Lives Matter. And we had 40 people coming to write and read poetry that day. Fortunately, the Park District lent us the chairs. We were able to socially distance with those. It was right around Earth Day, so we were celebrating Earth Day with caring for saplings and then writing about the experience and being together in the park, because for almost all of us, this is the first time we have gone out and met with other people in well over a year. So all of those tools were in boxes and bags that came with me, and just did different things, including the lipstick right inside of the tape for the poetry reading. We can move on to past my clutter and into the process and what those tools are used for. This is the wood carvings. So on the left, I am inlaying, that looks like a maple leaf that is, or a linden leaf that is coming off of a vine type tree on the very top. I'm looking at the center photo right now. On the very top, you could see how the inlay, yes, is a oak leaf, and that is a swamp oak at the end of our block. But I wanted to show just the variety that's on one block. Under my left arm, you can see how the bronze casting slips into, the bronze casting of a maple leaf slips into the carved surface. Look right under my left wrist. Yeah, thank you, with the arrow. That is a bronze casting of a leaf, and it is inlaid now. So the actual leaves will be inlaid so that water won't get behind them, as these are going to be installed outdoors. So on the very far left, you can see I'm working with the top angel-like or spiritual figure that is winged and looking upward. And there's a hand reaching up as the figure's underneath it. And there is a kind of bundled and inward figure at the very bottom that is emerging into this more spiritual, rising, but not necessarily religious figure. And then on the far right, well, I think that gives you an idea. So this sculpture is going to be at Hephzibah for the children to recognize the variety of leaves and get to know the trees in the Arboretum of Oak Park as something integral to our lives. Trees look like lungs and are our lungs, that we exhume carbon, and the trees take in that carbon, store it in the trunk, utilize it to grow their width so that they can last for hundreds of years, storing carbon all of that time. And then they give off oxygen. So walking under trees, within trees, we're breathing in better air than if the trees aren't there. The other benefits are, and we know this so well in Oak Park, that the trees cool the sidewalks, shelter us from the rain, cool our homes so that we don't have to use air conditioning as much, and they buffer the winds so that we don't have to heat as much. So the value of these trees that we in some ways take for granted would cost us exponentially more if we didn't keep planting them and taking care of them. So that's something we want to share with the Hephzibah Students Project. There are 130,000 trees in the last 5 to 8 years that have been taken out of Chicago parks alone. This is because of ash borer, locust borer, Dutch elm disease, and they're replaced by 200,000 saplings. And the saplings are planted not in a grove like an apple orchard or a lot of elm together or a lot of oaks together, which is how it would happen naturally. The acorn falls and the young tree grows up under it, and the canopy of the older tree allows it to grow its roots deeper and further and more substantial, just like we hover over our own children so that they have deep roots in their community. When that older tree dies, the saplings shoot up. Well, we're planting them on the parkways with strong sunlight. They're shooting up as fast as can be. They have no root connection to like saplings. So they need us to come in and ease their stress. We need to water them 2 inches every week of water. We need to mulch them because the leaves are being raked up and moved elsewhere, and they need that constant feeding of nutrients until their roots do connect with a like tree. And then those trees inform each other. So there's a lot going on underground with trees, as extensive as what's going on up above, that we could help with just a little bit of water and mulch every year. Volcano mulching is the worst, where the mulch grows up, is packed up the trunk. We want to scrape that away so that the trunk, water comes down the trunk and into the roots and leaves a donut shape of mulch around it. So that's something I do on the dog walk. I take my tool with me and move away volcano mulching from the trunks. We could go on to the next slide if you like. So this is the painting area in my studio. I draw, I paint, I make prints, I sculpt. My main art form is sculpture, but this is a series of paintings that I've been working on since 2017. My best friend from first grade called and said, we have a big birthday coming up. Let's go kayaking in Palau. And I said, sure, having no idea where Palau was. It turns out it's by the Philippines in the Macronesian waters. It's a 5,000-year-old culture on an atoll from what was once a volcanic ring. And the islands have grown up. So the area is shallow because of the volcanic activity that was there thousands and thousands of years ago. So Pat and her husband Rob and I and some other friends kayaked and snorkeled the entire country in 1 week. And this landscape on the back, on our left side, is the dynamic color and the competition of the coral for sunlight and nutrients and things at the surface. With all the life forms around it, there's fish and there's jellyfish and there's eels and snakes and all these landscape properties, that this could very well be above water as it is underwater. And Pat and I used to horseback ride in the fields in Lake Forest. We both had horses together, and we were always exploring these kind of landscapes and discovering prairies and understanding them better. And we also had a lot of formal gardens where we grew up. And I see a lot of what English gardens are trying to replicate in the color and the texture variety and the depth and the landscaping as you step back with the rock features. So many things we try and replicate in our own gardens are existing underwater and above. And I wanted to show the commonality of the landscape. that when we're caring so much for the prairie, we also need to care for the coral. Now, I'm going to tell you maybe more than you want to know about coral, because I have done a deep dive into the importance of it. Coral, it needs to grow on a shallow surface, like an atoll, like a reef area that is usually alongside a body of land. For instance, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. Only 1% of the sea floor is covered with coral, but coral supports 25 to 30% of sea life by it being a plant, an animal, and a mineral all at the same time. By a plant, it is constantly growing onto the surface of the limestone, the dead coral that's under it. And by an animal, there is actually algae within the openings of the coral that live in that landscape. And when we talk about bleached coral from carbonic acid in the water, which is the carbon we've exhumed, goes through the surface of the water, mixes with salt water, becomes carbonic acid. There's a chemical reaction, and that algae that is within the coral dies, and the reef itself dies without that algae, which is the vital life within it. The algae gives it the color and the vitality and allows it to grow. So reducing our carbon will help the really struggling coral bounce back over and over again. Coral has been around for centuries. It really wants to bounce back. We just have to reduce our emissions for that one chemical reaction that it hasn't evolved enough to compensate for. So on the right side, these are my tools, the bristle brush, the sable brushes. I like a variety of them to get kind of the broad brush of what you see in the water of that landscape, but then also the detail of the textures and the variety of textures of the coral. So we could go on to the next slide, Erin. These are my Palauan coral paintings. Once again, Palau is the archipelago near the Philippines that the United Nations is now doing a study and has for 3 years, because the coral in Palau is bouncing back. It's had 3 bleaching episodes, as has the Great Barrier Reef and the Caribbean coral, but Palauan coral bounces back. And so there's a very intensive research project going on how we can grow coral in carbonic acid filled water. Now, take into consideration that the Palauan Trench is the second deepest trench in the world. So all of these nutrients are coming up from the depths of where sharks and fish have swum hundreds of thousands of feet deep. And with the El Nino currents, those nutrients are pulled up and are feeding the coral, which is why there's such a variety of color and shape. When it's El Nino, the flow of the water is different, and we don't get the same flushing of nutrients over the coral. Both of those weather events, El Nino and El Niña, come across the southern Pacific Ocean and hit the United States directly. So the source of our weather conditions, the flooding that we've had in the last 3 years, is from the South Pacific Oceans. The South Pacific Oceans are particularly affected by carbon. The Atlantic Ocean has a whole different by aerosols. Aerosols are changing the Atlantic Ocean into hot spots that cause the melting of the glaciers up in Greenland and the northern pole. So there's two different Anthropocene actions that we have imposed on nature and the southern and northern seas and oceans that determine our weather and determine whether we're hotter or colder are directly affected by those two occurrences. Anthropocene means it's the name of the current extinction epoch that we're in right now, and it means human caused. So the amazing thing about this technique mix is that I start off with tempera, and this is a process that Van Eyck taught Leonardo da Vinci. They never met each other, but one was in Northern Europe and one was around Italy and France. And so Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa with this technique. On the left side, you'll see the black and white tempera stage. Now, when they were doing this, they were mixing egg white and white powder and then a Indian ink for the darkness. But we're actually starting off in these paintings with bleached coral. That's what happens to a coral reef when the carbonic acid has killed it. And in this process of glazing, from that beginning of tempera, we bring the coral back to life into the paintings that you're seeing on the right. So for me, it is just a fabulous experience to bring this dynamic between the different types of coral back to life through the technique mix paintings. So I start off with the black and white, and that is titanium white powder mixed with a couple of chemicals, a medium mix, and to reproduce in a contemporary way what Van Eyck and Leonardo da Vinci were doing. Then you can see down below, I kind of create the landscapes. It almost feels like I'm mapping the coral with the first layer of glaze. And that guides me to know where the colors are going and work with the composition. And then after about 10 or 15 layers of glazing, you get the paintings that are on the right. And I do that over and over again to show you the vibrant and dynamic life that's under the sea and how precious this is and how important it is to our own weather. The birds, I feel like, are more dynamic this spring than ever. And that is because we've had a year of hibernation and the world is more adapting to them a little more. So all of these corals have names. The white one there is lettuce coral. The gardens that we snorkeled in are all have names, Galileo's Bay, or they're all kind of genius names because it is brain coral that I'm basically painting. So on the right is my wood carving. In 2011, you might recall that storm that we had come through Oak Park very volatilely. It blew out all the windows of the Garfield Park Conservatory. And I happened to be at an environmental meeting at the Oak Park Library and looked out the window, and we canceled the meeting and everyone dashed home. And I texted the whole family and said, get under cover. And it was headed right to Oak Park, but it blew over a 300-year-old, very alive maple tree in our yard. So I've been carving that maple ever since. And by very alive, the spalting in there, which is the wonderful lines that are through the beautiful honey-colored maple. That tree was full of water. And so the water in the very alive tree has that effect of the spalting. So I carved birds from it with the thought of, if the tree had not met that wind in 300 years, what is happening to the hollow-boned birds as it comes through? And so I have perch, preen, soar, doves, birds of prey, and the variety of birds and the importance of the variety of birds is very important to what I'm sculpting and to my message. So you can see that I'm tying together two very complex ideas that we intuitively know. We need the variety of birds as for human life on Earth as an indicator species. If the sparrows are not coming back in the same numbers, why? What has changed, and how can we change what we've done to the environment so that human life is safer? So there is that each of us is connected to nature, and nature is telling us what we need to do to change our behavior. But then also we have this competition going on in the coral, where each species is struggling very hard to survive and to take over and to use what nutrients are there. So there's two different ways that we're all connected, for a struggle for survival and for a importance of the diversity of life. We can go on to the next slide. So here they all are, perch and preen. And one thing that I was very interested with the wood carvings is to show the difference of wild and domesticated as well. Many of the water birds that we see are domesticated, but they're, and the owls and birds of prey are wild. And so that's another aspect of what I was sculpting with my series of bird sculptures. So in the center is my friend Pat and I in kayaks in a cave. The Palauan archipelago is a series of islands that are limestone, and our trip was based on the moon. So we went at the full moon, which lowered the water so we could get in, we could actually kayak or swim into certain bays that you can't reach other times of the year. So we could get into further, more distant places. And out of that, there are these caves that get carved by the moon, by the tides. And the tides are significant there, and over 5,000 years, a lot of these limestone islands have been carved by the tides into a mushroom shape, where the bottoms of them are getting narrower and the tops are still full of a whole jungle of plants. So we're in a cave right there. And we did a lot of kind of kayaking under narrow spaces into bays, which also shows kind of, this won't be around forever, but probably through our lifetime. Most of the coral paintings that you're looking at are looking straight down on the coral as a swimmer would. There's a couple places where we're looking across at the coral, like in the landscape that I showed you at the beginning. But this is as if I wanted to just bring back images of how vital and varied and dynamic this phantasmagoric scenery is, and very much looks like gardens that we would enjoy walking through, to show that I would like to plant a garden like this coral. It's one of the reasons I took so many pictures, was maybe I can find the plants that would match this and have a kind of reproduction of a coral garden. So, I have sculpted authors over the years. I've been commissioned, I've done it on my own, I have done it for exhibitions. So in 2016, I was asked to attend a meeting for the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame. That was a planning meeting to determine how we were going to celebrate Gwendolyn Brooks' centenary. Many people in Chicago have heard of Gwendolyn Brooks, but not many people know that she's a writer, that she was the first Black Pulitzer Prize winner of any kind of writing, not just poetry, and both male and female. That she grew up in Bronzeville, that she had a mother who was a teacher, and a father who wanted to be a doctor, but was a janitor in a school. So she grew up kind of middle class for Bronzeville, I guess, but definitely oppressed in our redlining of her 100 years in on the south side of Chicago. At the park where she is, it's kind of a hub, and her homes throughout her childhood home, and then her homes where she raised her children, where she grew up, where she went along the Lakeshore Drive as a well-established poet and the Illinois Poet Laureate of, I think it was 30 years. All of those homes are almost equal distance to this park. So it's right in the center of where she was, where she lived, and where she took great pride. A lot of the other Black arts movement writers, Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, Margaret Walker, a lot of them moved out of Chicago when they gained national recognition, but Gwendolyn Brooks stayed here and felt that Chicago was really where her passion was. So I was at this meeting and I was taking notes, and we had agreed that the Chicago Literary Hall of Fame, that I was a treasurer and board member of, would give a trolley tour of Gwendolyn Brooks' life. And yet I'd already sculpted Richard Wright and Ernest Hemingway and Irene Leahy and other writers. Yeah, I think I had already sculpted them. So it wasn't that I was opposed to sculpting, but I didn't know if there was a need for it. So, a little background on me. When I went to grad school, I did a sculptural portrait for my thesis show of the women at Yale University in 1984. Women were only allowed in the Yale College for less than a decade before that. So I was kind of the second decade of women at Yale College. And so for me to sculpt a dozen women at that school at that time was pretty breakthrough. I didn't know it at the time. I was sculpting my friends. I went on to sculpt women who have made a contribution in Chicago for the just plain hardworking. I sculpted women for backyards of commissions, and a lot of times they were homemakers or restaurateurs or artists of some sort. And the men that I was sculpting was like John D. MacArthur, who was a multimillionaire, and Jack Egan, who was with the Catholic churches, and I showed him as a community organizer who happened to be a priest that we talked about earlier. But the women were in the roles that they could fit during their lifetime. And one, Ruth Rothstein, was a hospital administrator, and she came to that by being a community organizer. So I get around to sculpting. Oh, I'm at the meeting, and Nora Brooks Blakely, Gwendolyn's daughter, is on the left. And she came up to me after the meeting and said, there's a park in my mom's name that needs a sculpture of her. And I said, oh, well, I could do that. I sculpt writers, so that would fit in, and I sculpt women. And so I set out to learn more about Gwendolyn Brooks. I knew that she was a friend of my parents, which was another interest I had in attending the meeting. There was a centenary coming up, and I saw that there were scholars from all over the world coming to the Logan Center to talk about what they've discovered about Brooks, about her writing. There was a poetry reading at the Art Institute of Chicago Rudolph Auditorium that was filled to the brim. And they had Pulitzer Prize winners since Gwendolyn Brooks, and there was an array of 10 of them who read. Gwendolyn Brooks was the first. After her, and there was a few writers before her, Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, Margaret Walker, and then Gwendolyn Brooks. After her, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of writers. She had a great influence, and that's because she went into school and she listened to stories and she heard people and she wrote what she heard. And she inspired other writers and taught them that this is a path you could go on. This is open to you now. And she glazed the pathway for them to make it easier. That was the daunting part about sculpting this icon of Bronzeville and of the Black Arts Movement and the South Shore Arts Center and all the places that fed her and taught her. And she added by her own work so much for in a very concentratedly oppressed community. And part of the wealth of the Black Arts Movement coming out of there was the concentration and the oppression. And when they started to break out, they lost a lot of that, very vital and purposeful creativity. So after that meeting, I researched for 6 months while thinking how I would sculpt her. I met with Nora twice, and we just talked through what do we do about the hair? How should this be symbolized? And she sent me pictures that were her favorites of how she thought about her mother. And the hand on the head is the connection of the writer's action to the writer's thoughts. So it's kind of divining the idea, and then through the hand to the pen is the connection to us. But the writer first has to find the idea in their mind and in their vision and in their empathy. And that is what Gwendolyn could do so powerfully, is tell it like it is, straight and direct, but with an eternal optimism. There is always a way out. It will always get better. When the sun comes, how shall we greet him? She knew there would be a way out, and she tried to pick up the spirits without overriding the troubles of the time. So that is her gift to the world, because it is something that is read and responded to and felt in every country in the world. It's a part of humanity. So I gave her a very humanistic approach. I wanted to meet her. I never met her. So she's very realistically done. I wanted to make it, this is how it would feel. And my emotion of what I tried to express came from Nora. I went to her presentations and learned from Nora what it felt like to be in the room with her mother, because someone had said that after one. Nora, you you were your mother in that presentation. And so those were the things I was looking for so that I could interpret that into the artwork. So Gwendolyn Brooks is at Gwendolyn Brooks Park now at 47th and Greenwood. And there is a porch behind it, shown in that picture on the right. And she grew up as a girl writing from the back porch. So that you can go to that porch and present your poetry. And then on the back wall, it's 7 feet by 7 feet with clips. You can publish your poems so that others could read them. And so annually we have poetry workshops so that people can write during the workshop and present, or if they don't feel like reading their brand new poem right away, they could clip it on the wall and let others read what their expression is. Okay, so we go on to the next slide. This is Ernest Hemingway writing a very early book, Farewell to Arms. It is anti-war. It is a soldier. You probably know the story, but I wanted to show all the actions and the drawing itself. This drawing with the yellow sun sphere light gave me the idea for the sculpture. I did a lot of drawings, and it's on the left side, you can see where my drawing is on a masonite panel. And it's chalk, and I'm just finding my way. I knew that based on the Oak Park Art League residency program, that I had the Corona 3 typewriter to work with. That's a typewriter that Ernest Hemingway's first wife, Hadley, gave him. And he started to write with that. And in this symbol of stepping away from violence, there is a gun underneath the right hand. I've actually pressed one into clay on the picture on the left side at the bottom. A pistol is there, and the hand is pulling away from the gun, and the other hand is diving into creativity or writing. And then once again, we have the pen divining the idea in the hand in the middle. And I wanted to show the actions that were going on while Ernest Hemingway was writing A Farewell to Arms. So I call this piece Farewell to Arms without the A in front. At the time, he lived in Paris and didn't like cats. So I have him dropping a cat off the tabletop. Also, he's from Oak Park, a wealthy family in Oak Park. So in the background is bookshelves for the wealth of reading that he did as a child and in adulthood. And on the left side and underneath that sphere of yellow is drawings that just came out the year I was working on them from World War I that hadn't been seen before. And I found them on the internet. And so part of his divining the idea in this drawing, which became an encaustic and technique mix blend for the painting, he is somewhere betwixt, I call it, the knowledge that he has from all that writing and the war. And he's trying to tell that story in a novel. So that is the concept of what I have going on. The lace on the bottom is actually from Forest Park. I went and got a lace tablecloth, and that's put in with the encaustic, which is wax. Part of the encaustic is painted and part of it is collaged. The idea of what he's divining is glowing from that pencil that is touching the memory and the knowledge and creating the idea. And so that's the light bulb, very symbolic light bulb. But then also there's another light behind that is the enlightenment of having read as much as he has on the far top corner over there. So how to make that into clay? And it was the risk that I took is, how are people going to feel about these portions, parts of bodies? And I am not unhappy with how you walk around and see the action of the hands in different different actions to describe what it takes to write a book. Partially because we are used to, ancient Greek sculptures. We have hands and heads that we put on pedestals by their own. We're kind of used to seeing sculpture this way. And I think that the war experience he had, the pain that he had, fragmented his experience. He tried to remove himself from his body to write and focus on the writing, because he had so much pain from the airplane accident in Africa and the pain that he suffered from the injuries, the shrapnel injuries, while he was in World War I. So there was a Corona 3 that was at, we borrowed for the exhibit at Oak Park Art League. And I made a clay version of it on the bottom right. And afterwards, Dan and I went to Cuba and saw the original Corona 3 typewriter. So that was quite a thrill. On the left is Richard Wright. He is shown professionally with a tie and a collar as a professional writer, but he's balancing on that tie. When he left Chicago, he moved to New York, and there are rumors that he was involved with the communist era. It was, but he was not able to rent an apartment or buy a house or live in a space of his own ownership in New York City. His wife was white, and she also could not rent or purchase it because of his book. I don't think it was Black Boy. I think it was the, it'll come to me in a second. Sorry, I'm got too many thoughts on my mind right now. So I have him balancing on a tie, and he moved to Paris. And this was commissioned by the Richard Wright Foundation in Paris. His daughter ran that, and now it's blended with the Langston Hughes Foundation. On the right side is a portrait on the top of Alice and Sylvia, Alice Hayes and Sylvia Shaw, mother and daughter, who started Ragdale. And I made the whole framework as if it's a house, where you kind of get a mantle across the top. It peaks at these two women who gave 50 acres of prairie to the arts, to open land to preserve, and their family homes since the 1890s to the city of Lake Forest eventually, to be an artist colony so that writers, composers, artists could go there for a week or two, finish a project, start a project, push it along, complete it, whatever they could do in a couple of weeks. So the family history is very tied to the soil there. And I have a casting on the right of the pathway in the prairie, dog, deer, human footprints. The bottom left is elm roots that were planted by Sylvia's father, Howard Van Doren Shaw, the architect. So the whole structure has an architectural theme to it too, because he built Ragdale for his parents after he graduated from architecture school. So he planted those roots well over 100 years ago. And I felt like it became kind of the roots to the family that goes up into a matrimonial trunk in the middle. There's a male and female torso if you walk around it. And then in the frame pieces on there is Alice's poetry. She was a poet. Sylvia was a sculptor who taught me in high school how to sculpt. Sylvia's mother was a playwright, so everybody in the family had a connection to the arts and to nature. And the mantelpiece shows how the progression of being connected to the earth. In this case, it's a marble surface, but we roll in the earth, we play in the earth, and then we find our connection as adults sitting with the earth again. And so it is, the creative spirit is connected to nature. So this is the writer's corner. Lee Botts is on the right side. She saved Lake Michigan. And I have a sculpture of her with water actually flows through her hands into a 50-gallon drum. She lives down surrounded by the steel mills. And in the 70s, she stopped, she's not even sure how many, but it could have been 25 nuclear power plants from being built on Lake Michigan shores. Well, in time, we found out that wasn't a good idea, but she knew that it would warm the water and trouble the lakes, which we have 1/5 of the fresh water in the world in our Great Lakes. And she knew that this is too precious to play with overheating and changing the environment so quickly. To the right of her is my father, who is also a writer, but artist, and has several books that he has produced. Gwendolyn Brooks is straight on. Above her is Richard Wright. And then above that is the Technique Mix and encaustic painting of Gwendolyn Brooks from the drawing. On the left is John D. MacArthur that I sculpted for the state park named after him in North Palm Beach, Florida. And the back of Monsignor Egan, the community organizer who happened to be a priest. And then right in front of us in the circular table, those are the cast bronze leaves that will be inlaid into the wood. So in my Technique Mix painting, there's a moment in the books I was writing where I am a very young child and we're arguing over what cartoon to watch on Saturday. And I just step out that front door and go off into the woods. And that's where I discovered what for the rest of my life was watching logs melt into the ground to become ferns and the seasonal flowers coming up, and then learning the names as I grew up with that acre of woods in the front of the house. So this is my view back to my family home, which is called Airdrie. And the publisher, Aquarius Press, decided that this would be the cover of YA book, which is a spin-off of the trilogy, the Mac and Irene series. So the Mac and Irene series is looking at a great generation, which is symbolized by my parents, the greatest generation. They went through the 1929 crash that greatly affected both my mother and father. The 34 with the Dust Bowl, and those stories are told and how it affected their families. And each time it's a rebound. How is it that they can keep coming back? Like the economy did, but it was really the spiritual aspects and the creative aspects that gave an ongoing example of people bouncing back. This YA book just looks at my family growing up in this gorgeous setting. And after kind of reading about it, which is another book called If Trees Could Talk, you see it wasn't always a paved path. So now we can go to the next slide. And so that's a painting that was on the wall, and that's how it becomes the cover of the book. And this book was launched April 30th. So this is available now on PayPal. from the publisher Aquarius Press. The other painting that was on the wall is, we can go to the next slide, is my father's painting of a helicopter. So my parents never talked about their World War II experience. I had some brief descriptions from my mother, who flew with United Airlines, never really understood how pioneering World War II was until recently, really, in my research. But after Mom passed away, Dad started to talk about these experiences, and they must have had some pack of, if we just don't talk about it, we don't have to deal with it anymore. He would learn to fly an airplane in the Navy Air Force and ended up in the Army Air Force as a navigator on a flight in which he was just asked to join another troop, another group on this B-17 Flying Fortress flight over Mannheim, Germany, to drop bombs. And so he was the navigator. So he, on that mission, he was shot down into Germany and was in 3 different POW camps with a couple of forced marches in between them. And all of those, we got a little story like, oh yeah, we used to pour sugar water over snow to make ice cream, or, you know, very simple little stories that really told us only the very slimmest tip of the iceberg good stories. So after Mom passed away, we started to dive into what did happen, and he gave us more and more information. And there was one scrapbook. So this book is called World War II Saga, and it's the first book of the Mac and Irene series. So we can go to the next slide. And while I was researching, that painting was on my wall above my couch where I was doing the reading. And it literally just vibrated with its red, white, and blue. It's spinning, which his plane did as he was shot down. He had to jump out of a moving plane. And it just tells the story of one of the most horrific moments of his life. And so there's my romancing parents. Dad is in his Army Air Force uniform. Mom has gone to visit him. She just finished Teachers College at Francis Parker Teachers College, and she's about to become she's about to fly throughout the United States in a United Airlines Stratoliner, which is exactly the same plane Dad was in, the B-17 bomber over Europe. So there they were, Mom in the continent and Dad in Europe, flying in the same plane. Until 1945, when they were married, and he was ready to quit flying, and she had to quit because of the war effort. They called all the women in, like Rosie the Riveter, to, you know, build the planes and play the baseball and be in the flight and move the military and supplies around. And then once the men came home, quit your job and be a housewife. That's what we need you to do. And everybody gladly did it. So that was the can-do era. They were the first teenagers where they actually had income and time. And so that's when the first era of creating a market for teens who had excess money. And so we've seen where that's gone in our kids' generation and my own, where there is a whole teen economy with music and clothing and food and drive-ins and all kinds of things like that. So this book is launching in a week, June 1st. It'll be both an Audible book and a hardbound book. And we're just at the final galley stage right now, but we'll have the books very soon.